Hello, I'm David Mandy, representing the pro bono arm of O&M Partners in New York. I was too young to fight in the Vietnam War, but it had a huge impact on my childhood. Many of the older brothers of my friends didn't make it back, and I witnessed the suffering and often the neglect of those who did. Just thinking about veterans opens my heart. As a writer, I had the insight that Dr. Ken Atchity's thinking might help veterans reinvent themselves coming home. And we're not talking about just resumes. As my friend, Lieutenant Colonel retired Nicole Drury points out, coming home from the military is a story full of intensity, and not always a match with the more superficial commercial world. It's a story that often gets out of control and winds up controlling you adversely. There's a sea of voices in all our heads vying for control. Our inner stories are competing. And because the strongest thoughts tend to win, you want to make sure your story actually serves you. Ken Atchity believes that the universe is made up of stories. Today, Ken is focused on helping you come up with stories that serve as roadmaps to inner peace and personal fulfillment. This is not a medical model. Ken is not focused on pathology or the interpretation of your behavior. It's a positive and creative approach to helping you live the story that you want to tell, rather than living a self-rejecting story, which we're all already experts at. Before I turn to the broadcast over to Dr. Atchity, I need to recognize the support of Richard Drago, commander of Chapter 1782, Military Order of the Purple Heart, which is made up of wounded combat veterans all over the United States and its extended territories. This call would not have happened without the support of Commander Drago, and I want to thank him from the get-go. So on this note, I'm going to turn the call over to Ken Atchity.
Thanks, David. I appreciate the intro. And how's everybody today? I hope you're staying relatively safe. I'm thrilled to be here. And David's right. The universe is made of stories. At least our human universe is made of stories, more than it is of atoms. From the first time a caveman came back to the cave without dragging a gazelle behind him, everybody wanted to know, what's your story? That's kind of how humans would greet people from another planet. What's your story? We sent Pioneer out into space with runes, codes showing what our story is for other civilizations, because we know that's what they'd want to know, what's your story? But when you think about it, we are absolutely inundated and surrounded and saturated with stories all the time, whether it's a jury trial where the jury is trying to sort out which story they believe, whether it's a first date where you're sitting there wondering whether that story is really making sense, or what is this guy's story? What is this gal's story? Whether it's you're listening to a commercial on television and you just don't believe the story, you're rolling your eyes because you've seen it 100 times and you know it's not true. Whether it's a politician, we're always evaluating our lives with what's your story. And during your service years, you basically were working for a bigger story than yourself. You didn't even have to believe in the story. You were still doing your service to the country. And now you are in a situation where before, one of the things you sacrificed was your story. Now you're coming back into a world where you need to take charge of your story and recapture your own story, or find it if you've never found it before. And that's what I like to help people with, because I believe that beneath every situation, there is a story waiting to come out and to clarify. So it's time to strategize, to review the strategy and tactics for reinventing your story. My story is that my father was in the military. He actually worked as a non-commissioned officer, worked himself up to captain on Eisenhower's staff during the invasion of Normandy, responsible for all the civilian landing craft that were used, and then went from London to Paris to Berlin, and then came back to Kansas City. And I remember this as a child growing up, with one of his top loyalties being to the American Legion and the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And we were constantly at events that were held by these organizations, like so many today that support veterans and give them help in what they're trying to do, including for my father, finding a job and a career that actually made him happy. So I was married when the Vietnam War broke out, so I wasn't able to serve myself, but I'll never forget what sacrifices people, you guys have made by serving a country that needs to be served. What I did throughout my career was to change careers. I went from being a corporate guy working for AT&T Long Lines Government Communications in charge of the NASA headquarters account to being a professor of comparative literature and communications, and then to finally being a producer, literary manager, story manager in Hollywood, with my last film being The Meg, which just appeared last year to nearly $500 million worldwide. So I really changed stories, and I'll never forget I was invited on a Joyce Brothers television show about career change, and two of the other people invited, one was a man who was 76 and had just graduated from the University of Chicago Law School. And during his stand in the graduation line, a young man behind him tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Sir, are you sure you're in the right line?" And the older man turned to him and said, "Young man, what line should I be in?" I always love that, because that's really the story of career change, is that you should find the line you want to be in. And if you can't find it, then you have to discover it. You have to create that line for yourself. And that's what I think the most exciting challenge about re-entering is. Everyone's first career is an accident, more or less. Many of us started their first careers kind of as students. But their second career, their next career is what they were meant to be doing. And let's make sure that you are in charge of that, not just having something happen to you. So whether you have a job that you hate or a job that you're okay with, but or you have no job at all, I see you as still being at a place where you can make a bridge to a job that fulfills you. That you are happy with, that is really the job for you, the work for you. I call it work, because I never forgot what Benjamin Franklin said in his autobiography, that there's nothing wrong with retirement as long as it does not interfere with the man's work. And that's the way I feel about what I do. I love it, and I want you to love what you're doing too, and maybe I can help with some ideas about how to go about that. Some of the challenges that you maintain, that you will discover when you try to break back into civilian life, are challenges that are met by other people, creative people that I deal with all the time. And I think the same things apply. There are a lot of voices in your head if you're even a normal person. And I kind of define them in three ways. One is the accountant that's always keeping track of time, that knows what's going on at every minute, that knows that you're running 3 minutes late, that you're going to miss the show if you don't hurry up, etc. One of them is a visionary, a dreamer, and that's the one that doesn't care about the time, doesn't even know what time it is. All they care about is whatever makes you happiest, and that's what they want to do. But a third voice in your mind helps you sort this out. I call it the managing editor, me for short. And listening to the two other voices helps you understand that life, as you succeed in it, is just a matter of figuring out what your mind is trying to do to you and tricking it, making it work for you, for your managing editor view, not for some other random thing. So if you don't have a job, I think you're on a bridge that will lead you to success. If you do have a job that you don't like, keep the job, keep your day job for the moment until you find that right job. And one of the things you're going to deal with from the very beginning is the equation, or the question of money versus satisfaction. Money is not everything. I learned that growing up when my mother used to say, all your father cares about is money. Well, turned out that wasn't exactly true, but I understand that money is not everything. It's a lot better than not having it, but there are more satisfying things in life, and a lot of people with a lot of money are not very happy. So really what life is all about, I find, is purpose. It's finding something to do that satisfies you. You need to whenever anything happens that you make happen, it's because you invest in yourself. Right now, you're investing time in listening to this. Time is a very important asset to invest. Money is another asset to invest. Those two things are required. You don't just go off and start selling real estate without investing the time and the money it takes to get a license. You don't go off and fly an airplane, as some of you may know, without investing a lot of time. So the first thing that you need to know is to take a close look at the resources around you, and nobody will be watching you. No one will judge you. So just be honest, make a plus and minus list. Here's what I'm strong at. Here's what I'm weak at. Here's what I like to do. Here's what I don't like to do. So it starts with identifying the resources around you. Those are resources within you, but you also want to identify other resources, that you have connections, that you have the ability to travel, you speak another language. Make a list of these things so we start knowing exactly where we are, as general would survey a battlefield and figure it all out before coming up with a plan of action. So the next step, obviously, is making a plan. Plans are important. Aristotle, one of the first philosophers, said happiness is not a plan. You need to have a little bit more specific, right? And so along the way, you want to make sure you know the difference between a plan and an objective. It's kind of the difference between strategy and tactics. An objective is long range, and the steps you have to take are the tactics to get there. And when you think about that, nothing can interfere with your long range goal. I'm sorry, goals are long range, objectives are the specific tactics. When you think about nothing can interfere with your long range goal, you're going to be calmer about going through the performance of the various objectives that are tactically necessary to get to that goal. And you shouldn't be worried if you fail. We'll talk about failure in a minute, but so make a plan and not only stick to it, but put it on an agenda, that is a timeline. Say, by 1 month from now, I am going to have accomplished this or that when it comes to searching for what I should be doing and what will make me happy and sustainably happy financially. But don't forget on that day that you put in the calendar for the future, that on that day you're going to assess where you are with the plan and you're going to revise your plan. Putting revision in the plan is crucial, because if you forget to do that, you're setting up your own self-sabotage. Plans are to be revised, and revision is part of the planning process. And as an ancient philosopher, Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would do, then do what you have to do. And don't worry about being overwhelmed by the task in front of you of identifying your work and figuring out how to get to it. If you remember another philosopher who said, if you put a little upon a little, soon it will become a lot. That's one of my favorites, because it was about a farmer who was told that he had to move a pile of manure from one side of the barnyard to the other. And he looked at it and realized it could take him, would knock him out to do that. But he just decided to move 2 shovelfuls a day. And before he knew it, it was moved. So if you just tell yourself, all I have to do is to spend an hour or 2 hours at the most every day making outreach calls, working on plans about getting my case forward here, that's not so overwhelming, especially if you recognize that action is what it's all about, not thinking. You don't want to spend too much time in the planning process. You want to start doing more. As Ray Bradbury used to tell writers, start doing more. It'll get rid of all the moods you're having. Moods are overcome by action. And as far as procrastination, okay, I'll get to this tomorrow. Anthony Robbins said, postpone procrastination. You can procrastinate just fine and do it with postponing. And Nike said, just do it. That's what it's all about. Shakespeare said, action is eloquence. People have realized in the past. Gandhi said, take massive action. So nobody can beat you if you're massively active in going forward to what you're trying to achieve. So controlling your present consciousness along the way, by the way, is your greatest achievement. The mind is a terrible thing, as we all know. It can do you in if you let it. It will do you in if you let it. But you can control it. You know, our greatest freedom, another writer said, our greatest human freedom is the freedom to choose our attitude. I was once working at home and trying to talk on the phone, and I had a plumber in working on the toilet in my far bathroom. And he was singing so loud, I couldn't even hear the phone, the person on the other end of the phone. And as he walked out to leave, I hung up the phone and I said, I want to ask you something. Where did you get your attitude? Because it was just made you cheerful to hear the guy singing. He said, you know what? I'll tell you, I can go back to the office and find out they fired me. I can go back home, find out my wife left me. I can open the refrigerator for a beer and find out there ain't nothing left in the refrigerator. But the one thing they can't take away from me is my attitude. And I use that as a model of my own mind. The minute you're getting down about anything, snap out of it. You have control over your attitude. You can do it. So you can control your present attitude. And someone said that's the greatest human courage of all, is the courage to take responsibility for your present attitude. And along the way, it helps to keep your sense of humor. My father belonged not only to the VFW and the American Legion, but to the Optimist Club. And the one joke he ever told me that worked was, he said, an optimist fell off the top of the Empire State Building. Halfway down, he said, well, so far, so good. And I love that attitude, because optimism to me is the only logical philosophy. Pessimism doesn't lead to any achievements at all. It just gets you down. But optimism is the way to go, even if it doesn't succeed in the end. It doesn't matter. At least you're happy along the way. So keep your sense of humor. And I once said to a client, how do you manage not to take your situation seriously? And he said, because I just refuse to internalize every effing thing I've created for myself. He just had a perfect attitude. And it helps to take things hour at a time. When things are bad, take them hour at a time. Can I get through the next hour? Take them day at a time. Take them a week at a time if you get to. If you can, take them a month at a time. But focus on the actual now. The struggle is the great thing about it. St. Catherine of Siena said, all the way to heaven is heaven. Meaning that's what we appreciate the most when we get there, is the struggle, and we realize those were our happiest times. So enjoy that. Don't think that it's just a chore. It's actually an exploration in which you're the hero going forward, and you're the one who's going to figure out what your story is and make it happen. And along the way, things can get tough. As Harry Truman said, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. What he didn't say is, goes without saying, at least to that president, is, but come back. Okay, we need you to come back. But when things do get tough, take some time off from this goal that you got. Go fishing, go for a drive, go for a walk, work out. And don't forget along the way to use your discipline to keep your body sound. The Jesuits taught us corpore sano, mens sana in corpore sano, a sound mind and a sound body. And I would suggest that you rate your health every day from 1 to 5, 5 being the best, and rate your mood along with it. Why? Because keeping track when you're involved in a quest gives you power. It makes you feel better. It's why prisoners scratch dates off on the walls of their prison. Ignore the ups and downs as you go through it. The ups and downs are misleading, because the downs can make you feel terrible, and the ups can make you feel so elated that it just can't work. That's where Zen comes in. My favorite Zen philosophy is, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. I love that. I love the balance, the evenness of it all. And a simple piece of suggestion is, every morning before you get out of bed, figure out something fun you're going to do in the evening, whether it's just, I'm going to go have a hamburger, I'm going to go play a round of golf, I'm going to play a pickup game at the nearby court, and it'll change your attitude toward the whole day, because how bad can it be if you end up with your pals playing basketball at the end of the day? And I call that breakfasting on hope, because the little bit of hope a soldier can make a long day work. So use the discipline that you learned in the service to resist your need for short-term gratification. You've had short-term gratification, and it's fine while it's happening, but it doesn't sustain. Just to show those voices inside your head, who's the boss, look for the long range, look for the goals. Don't worry about the individual objectives, just do them. Identify a safety net if you need to. Know that you can always jump on a train and go visit Aunt Sally and shack up at her house for as long as you need to get back on your feet. And then don't use the safety net. Walk that rope as though you didn't have the net. But it's rational to want to see if you've got a safety net of any kind, including many organizations that can help you. Use your assessment capabilities to identify the people around you and whether they're helpful to your goal or not. Staying away from the grumbling soldiers, staying away from the false friends and the naysayers, so who aren't going to help you with your story and who are going to bring you down. I used to give a course at UCLA called Keeping Your Spirits Up, and in my first day in one of those courses, I had a number of actresses who were coming to LA to make it in show business. And I said, let's start by introducing one another around the room. Tell us your name, where you're from, and what is the question that you hate to hear the most when you're out about the town, and how do you answer that question? And the first one said her name was Nina, and she was from Detroit. And the question that she hated to hear the most was, when are you going to go back to Detroit and work for the post office? And I said, oh, that is a killer. I can see. And how do you usually answer that? She said, usually by bursting into tears and leaving the room. So I thought, well, here's a woman who needs some help. That's why you're taking this course. We're going to help you with that. And the next person said her name was Mary and that she was from Miami. And the question that she hated to hear the most is, what have you been in big lately that I've seen? And I said, how do you answer that? That's terrible. And she said, the Pacific Ocean. And that always makes everybody laugh. And I thought, here's the difference. Here's the person who knows her story, and here's the person who does not know her story. And not knowing your own story makes you very vulnerable to the thoughtless people around you. Now, these people are not evil just because they ask you that question. They're just thoughtless. They're not thinking hard to know what kind of reaction that question could cause in you, right? So, but the other girl, she knew that people were going to ask her that because she assessed the situation and she prepared something to defend herself from this inevitable question that people ask in LA. What have you produced big that I've seen? What have you written big that I've seen? And guess what? Their questioning doesn't usually last more than one question. They're not really that interested in you. They just want to hear your response. So if you have a response ready, it's like having your gun loaded before you go onto the battlefield. You wouldn't think of not loading it like the girl from Detroit did, right? So do you get rejected when you're on this quest? Yes, you do. And how do you deal with that? No one can reject you except yourself. Everyone can tell you, from Thomas Edison, who tested 10,000 filaments before he found the solution to the bulb, to Henry Ford, who tested infinite number of parts before he could put together a car. Rejection is what makes it happen. And actually, the worst thing about rejection is the word itself, because it's usually only you that apply that to yourself. Other people just say, doesn't feel right for us now, or we'll get back to you, et cetera, et cetera. If you get discouraged along the way, and you will, I predict it, you will, of course, if you're not already discouraged. Remember what Aristotle said too. What is success? Success is steady progress toward a worthy goal. And the worthy goal is to find the work that works for you the best. So you're successful if you're making steady progress. One little setback has nothing to do with the long-term objective. One more piece of advice is, don't ask for help when you can ask for advice. Advice is so much easier for people to give, and it's so much less intimidating to them to say, I'd be happy to give you some advice, than to ask for help. If you don't really need help a lot of the time, you need the resources around you, and people are happy to advise you. And one of the things that you really look at is your best ally in all of this is time. The various kinds of time, the management of time, like putting in 1 hour a day, using a stopwatch to put in that hour so that you're not controlled by the clock on the wall. There are a lot of tricks you'll learn along the way. You can learn along the way. But one thing that's not a trick is meditation, the power of concentrated meditation, where you try to, for some time every day, from 5 minutes to 20 minutes, try to empty your mind, watch the boats float by on the river. Those boats are your thoughts, but be separate from them. Watch them go, because they're not you. They're just your mind doing its busy, busy, busy thing. And the you is that managing editor. It's the me. And learn how your mind works so it can work in your favor. And don't fear failure. My last piece of advice before we start talking questions here is, I'll tell you a story. Long ago, I had a girlfriend who was a satsangi. She was part of this cult that had a whole lot of rules, including celibacy, which was fun. But I went with her to India once to see her master at work, and went to what's called a satsang, where they all get together, 100,000 people in a field. And I'll never forget, the poor guy looked a bit weary sitting up there answering questions at the end. And then some woman finally said, "Master, I know you tell me to pick myself up when I fall, but how many times can I pick myself up?" And the guy, you could just see the sparkle in his eye, because he had the perfect answer for this. He said, "Sister, how many times can you fall?" So along the way toward finding what works for you in life, fall as many times as you can, because you can always pick yourself up. And that's kind of what I wanted to say, except to encourage you, never give up, never give up, never give up. And if you get discouraged, think of some of the things that we talked about. And, you know, David, I would love to answer questions so I can be more useful than you can be when you're just generalizing.
Sounds good, Ken. We'll turn to the questions. Thank you for your advice. I thought it was terrific. Let's start with Ama Adair. Ama, a question for Ken.
Actually, yes, Ken. So in both the literary and the film worlds, there tends to be a lot of waiting for information that may or may not ever come, and a lot of times requesting it's discouraged. That classic "don't call us, we'll call you." Now, getting or requesting feedback or updates, while not always timely when you're in the military, it's encouraged. So going from that kind of world to complete silence is very unsettling. So what advice do you have for dealing with that kind of long stretch of not knowing where you stand?
I'm glad to see you here today. Ama is a brilliant novelist who is currently in the service, but will be leaving in the relatively near future. But she's written a book that everybody should read called The Shadow Game, a thriller. And now she's almost finished with her second one. And thank you for coming today. And thank you for that question. I mean, Anna, the very same thing occurred to me when in my third career, going into Hollywood, I realized that most of what people do is wait. You send out something, you're waiting for a star to read a script and say if she wants to do it or not. You're waiting for a financer to make up his mind. You're waiting for a director to give a start date. Always waiting. And as a time management maniac, I said to myself, what do you do with all this time in the waiting room? And I came up with the rule for myself: no waiting in the waiting room. While you're waiting, you do other things. Again, to quote Gandhi, you take massive action. You do so many other things that the waiting doesn't even occur to you, because you wouldn't think of doing nothing while you're waiting, much less bemoaning your fate or getting depressed. You simply work on another aspect of your goal. You work on improving yourself. You work on your physical wellness. There are lots of things to do if you got your plan together, and that's what you do while you're waiting. You don't even think about the fact that you're waiting, because you know that is the nature of life. Basically, it's concentration and abandonment, concentration, abandonment, events, and then no events. That's the cycle. So you learn that cycle, you know that cycle, and that's what you do in the I call the waiting room. You don't wait. no loitering in the waiting room. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Ken.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Amma. If you have another question, we certainly welcome it.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to take up all of Ken's time, so if somebody else wants to jump in, but otherwise I can come up with a few.
Yeah, why don't you tell us, why don't you ask another, we'd love to have another question. We've got plenty of time.
Okay. Well, another thing that came to mind as you were talking, when you're dealing with all of these people who are making these grand choices about career changes and trying to move in a different direction of their life, I hate to ask, but are there any signs that, where somebody is running down the wrong path, and how do you identify that and keep from falling into that mistake?
Well, let me look at it, to have you look at it this way. You can't make a mistake in trying to be yourself. So let's start with that. If somebody asks, like, what are the 3 most important things about breaking in or making a transition, I would say they are remembering that you are in charge. You're the quarterback of your own team. Don't wait for somebody else to do something for you. You are always in charge. And number 2, I would say, create a plan. Create a plan that you set a time to revise every 2 weeks, every 30 days, every 6 months, whatever it is, but create a plan, remembering what Aristotle said, happiness is not a plan. And number 3, enjoy the moment. Don't just get through the moment, or don't just live the moment, but actually enjoy it and relish it, because it's the moment that is what life is all about. And those are the 3 things. If you do those things, you won't even, you'll have false starts, but they're just, you can't go the right way if you haven't gone the wrong way. That's how you learn the right way. You fumble your way forward, which is why, some animals have feelers and some animals have antennae to find the way through the complicated world. So that requires trial and error, and don't be afraid of trial and error. It's another word for failure, and the only failure is not doing it.
Thanks for your questions, Amma. Greatly appreciated. We'll turn to Norman Stevens. Norm,
Hey,
do you have
Norman.
You're unmuted.
I unmute. I'm having a terrible time with this program.
You sound great. We can hear you, Norman.
You can hear me now. Okay.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You're
Okay, great. No, I had a hard time getting on, as I think Randy knows. But anyway, let me just share a few thoughts. I'm a Vietnam vet with 2 combat ribbons. I was trained as an M60 machine gunner in a helicopter. When I went over, I was in the first replacement plane during the Tet Offensive in January of 1968. And I was very fortunate. What I did to prepare myself, I was advised by other friends of mine who'd been in the Army. They said, take every test you can take. Take a typing test, get a top secret security clearance. So I was a good candidate for a headquarters job. And after 2 weeks of flying combat missions, helicopter missions, I was called in for an interview at USRV headquarters in Long Bin and got a job in personnel. And what I've always told people, I'm fortunate I'm sitting here with all my arms and limbs, but I learned more in my 2 years in the Army than I did attending 3 Ivy League schools, one of which I have a degree from. Okay. And when I got out of the Army, I first thought I wanted to go into teaching. I was an English major in college, and I got a job at a private school in York, Pennsylvania. At the end of that year, I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do, but what I wanted to do was go back in the entertainment business, which I got into in college. And purely by accident, what I did is I was a manager of the largest summer theater in the country, a 2,600-seat theater. And I went to a restaurant in New York visiting friends. This would have been in 1969. And I went to the restroom, and standing next to me at the urinal was a guy named Frank Conley, who ran and owned the largest summer theater in the country, 2,600 seat Carousel Theater. He said, "Oh my goodness, are you out of the Army?" I said, "Yes." He said, "What are you doing this summer?" I said, "I'm looking for something to do." He said, "You're my general manager of the theater." And when Ken said that sometimes your first job is just luck or circumstances or bungling into something.
So Norman, now I understand why you never pass a men's room.
Exactly. Especially the older I get. But in any event, that led to a career in theater, and then I had another change of careers like Ken. I realized that the live theater business was really not a productive way to spend my life, so I wanted to get into television and film and moved to Los Angeles. And when I moved to Los Angeles, the advice I was given is always tell everyone, when people say, "What are you doing in LA?" give everyone the same answer. And I loved working with writers, and I always told people I'd love to be a literary manager or agent. And all of a sudden, I met Joan Scott, who ran a very good agency in both New York and Los Angeles. I told her she knew that she and I knew some celebrity writers in New York in common. And about a week later, she called me up and said, "I have a literary agent just left to go somewhere else. I've got a corner office and a desk and an assistant. When do you want to start?" I said, "I'll start tomorrow." And that's what led to a very long career, as Ken knows, in the entertainment business, with 10 years as an executive and producer at Warner Brothers Television. And even though I'm living in Reno, Nevada now, I've been, in the past 4 years, I've had 3 Hallmark Christmas movies on the air. So I was also told, and this is, I think, good advice for anyone looking for a career, whenever I would talk to anyone in LA, the advice I was given is at the end of your conversation, say, "Are there 2 names you can give me? And may I use your name?" And say, "Ken Atchity suggested I talk to you." And that led to so many contacts. And I was very disciplined about that. I made sure I got their names, I got their phone numbers. I did some research on what they did. And there are still people that I made those contacts with that I'm still in touch with. So
that's a even more organized way of asking advice. That's a great idea to end meetings that way, because people don't mind giving advice. It doesn't cost them anything.
Exactly.
And they're not responsible for anything when they give you advice. Whereas if you ask for help, or could you please give me a job, it's a whole different mindset. And
Right.
Some of the best breaks that people get just came from a lead like that. And I'm glad you brought that up. That's good advice in itself. You know, somebody asked a question along the way toward preparing for this. It said, how can veterans tell their military story in their workplace in a way that makes them more relatable to their co-workers who haven't been in the military? Or how can you best tell a military story in a job interview without and still be relatable? I think best answer to that is prepare that in advance, the way the woman did who said the Pacific Ocean was what she'd been in big lately that people have seen. Because people don't want to hear the whole story. Like always, they're just being sociable when they ask you about your military experience. So come up with a witty response that also maybe has a nugget of wisdom in it, make something to make them stop and think, but don't feel that you have to tell them the whole story. Because if you tell them something memorable, that's enough, and it'll form a bond with them immediately, and you'll be able to go on. I just think that having that prepared is part of your story. When I mean about your story, I believe that every situation has an underlying story to it, a structure. Like I was asked once to write a book for a famous governor, let's say, who was running on the youth vote in his state, and he wanted to not be polite, clear the shit out of state government. So I started thinking about his situation and what he'd done in his life already, and I realized that his story was the story of Hercules. a mighty guy who just went out there and did these impossible labors, including finally cleaning the shit out of King Augeas's horse stables by diverting a river through the stables. And I said to him, you know, what you're doing is diverting a river of young voters to clean out the stuff from the Minnesota stables. And the whole book we wrote for him had to do with making that story the structure of the story. And he liked it so much he used it in his campaign. So by figuring out that that was his deep story, who he really saw himself as, he was able to achieve his goals. And that's what I urge you to do, is like, think about all the stories you know in your life and then figure out which one you relate to the most and start realizing how much in you is really determined by that story and aided and abetted by that story, so that you can turn that story into the ending that you're looking for.
Really appreciate your involvement, Norman. Thank you for the questions. We're going to turn now to Lieutenant Colonel retired Nicole Drury, who's been very helpful on this call. Nicole? Unmuting. The technology is always. Nicole, are you with us?
She may need to unmute herself.
Nicole, could you unmute yourself? I think you'll be good then. Oh, there you are.
Hi, David. Ken, can you hear me?
Nicole.
Yeah,
We can hear you.
Great. Ken, one of the things that you mentioned in the opening part of your talk was that you often put your own plan on the back burner because of the military's plan. You kind of submit yourself to following the military's plan. So when you leave the military, you know, how do you find your own sense of identity or your purpose after that, especially if you've served a whole career, maybe 20 or 30 years in the military?
Well, that is a profound question, and it's really the heart of what we're trying to help you with. The way you do it is through assessment, through dead sober assessment of your strengths and weaknesses on one hand, but most of all on what you love and what you don't love. Because in an ideal life, I never forget a book I read by Marcia Senador that was called "Do What You Love, the Money Will Follow." One of my books is "Quit Your Day Job and Follow Your Dream." And in that story, she kind of repeats the old Jewish wisdom that the secret of happiness is to find what you love the most and then find a way to make money doing it. And I have a cousin who came back from the military, and you know, for about a year, he was depressed because he couldn't find a job that he wanted to take, and people were worried about him. Meanwhile, while he was looking, he was so good at cutting grass and taking care of lawns that people kept asking him, more and more people kept asking to do it. And today, 20 years later, he has got a big lawn care company, because the thing that he liked the most was doing that. He was happy working outside, happy with the smell of the new mown grass, just happy not having to interact with people all day, but to do something useful. And he started making money at it more than he ever thought he could. Ended up having a staff of people so he could do 10 houses a day instead of 1 or 2. So it's a question of being honest with yourself about what you love, and don't go in with the attitude that you could never make money doing that, because there will be false friends along the way who'll tell you that's not practical. You know, it's the parents who want you to be something. They want you to be a dentist. They want you to be a doctor. They want you to be something that they know is associated with money. But what if you're a guy who's just a natural salesman and what you do best is sell cars? People have made fortunes doing that, and they also have had wonderful lives. I have a friend who's got, I think, 16 classic cars of his own, because all he cares about is cars. That's what he cares about the most. Let's put it that way, to be fair. So it's a question of starting with what you love and just sitting there by yourself with a pad of paper and being honest about what you love, and then start searching or how people earn a living doing that. There's almost nothing that people love that they can't earn a living doing. Like I love stories. I love reading stories, talking to people about stories, figuring out, developing stories, making them stronger, selling stories, producing stories. And I can't even believe that I make money doing that, because it's like, if anybody finds out, I'll be in trouble. You know, I used to smile when I picked out a roll of stamps, thinking that I paid for these stamps because of I'm doing what I love, and I get to keep doing more of it. That's a great feeling of satisfaction that too few people go for, because they settle for that going back to the post office and work, you know, going back and working for the post office. Not that that isn't a great job too, but in this world especially, it's a world built for entrepreneurialism, for independent thinking, for doing what you like. If what you love the most is fishing, I have a cousin in Louisiana who is a guide who guides people fishing. He does that 5 days a week on his fishing boat, but guess what he does the other 2 days? He fishes by himself. So he's fishing all the time, basically. And that to me is the secret of it, but you have to be honest enough and brave enough, honest enough to figure out what it is, and brave enough to go for it.
Nicole, follow up on that, Nicole? Would you like to follow that up?
Oh, that was an excellent answer. I was just taking a bunch of notes here as you were talking. One of the things that you also talked about earlier was in a job interview, or when you're transitioning into a new location with neighbors or colleagues, you know, how to tell your story that would make you relatable. And I liked your advice of, you know, keep it short. Nobody wants to hear your whole story, and find a nugget that would connect you to people. Do you have anything else? Any other advice?
Well, that's a very good question too. Nicole, you should be like the questioner in chief here, because I love these questions. I was once a professor in Italy, Fulbright professor for a year, and I had a good friend who was also a professor. And one day he said to me, his wife had left him basically. She was from Puerto Rico, he was Italian. And at first they thought, because they were both Latinos, that they would get along. But it turns out that Puerto Rico and Italy are two completely different cultures. And he started to explain that to me, because I said, you know, why? And he said, he started theorizing and trying to explain the essence of Puerto Rican culture, the essence of Italian culture. He goes, no, wait a minute. Let me just tell you a story. And then he stopped and said, because after all, isn't that what life is? It's just a story. And I never forgot that, because the answer to what you're saying is tell them a story at the interview, no matter what you have to do, whether it's a joke, jokes work, you know, they break the ice. Like I want to die peacefully in my sleep, like my grandfather, and not screaming at the top of my lungs like the passengers in the car he was driving when he died. You know, tell them a joke, or tell them something that happened to you in the service that is apropos to what's going on at the moment that they can use, but figure out a story to tell them. You know, walk in with 3 stories in the back of your mind and tell the one that works the best. Like the actress did, who came up with the answer, the Pacific Ocean, because she wanted to be in charge of that. Like the secret to any interview is to be in charge of it, and to make sure that what you want to say is what gets said, not just answering questions. Anybody who trains people for the media to go in front of television or radio will tell you the same thing. Make your points clear during the interview, regardless of what you have to do to the questions that you're asked. Ignore the question, make your point. And that's what you do to win an interview for a job or for a career position, is you take charge of the story. So you need to take charge of your own story, figure out what's your, what is the nature of your particular heroism in life, and make it clear to the people that are interviewing you. I hope that's, this kind of thing is very personal, so it's hard to answer things generally, but that's my general response to that very good question.
Nicole, I'm thinking, I don't want to talk out of school, but I'm thinking of the story when you had an interview. One of the people that you were interviewing didn't think you had the mental toughness, and your response to them? maybe I'm going too far on that one, but I've watched, yeah, it's quite impressive. Quite impressive.
But I like responses that start with, let me tell you a story. Because the minute you say, let me tell you a story, people are all ears. They can relate to stories. They can't relate to algebra. They can't relate to equations or philosophical points half the time, but they can always relate to a story. It's what humanizes us and brings us to a common denominator. And that's, I think, the way you get your get people to listen to you, is tell them a story.
Nicole, anything to follow that up?
Well, I feel like I've been on the line here for a bit and want to open it up to anybody else who.
Okay, that's okay. One more and then we'll go for it. We've got plenty of time.
Let's see.
I'll come back to you, Nicole. Is that agreeable?
Okay. Sure.
I saw Todd, David, Todd Robinson, I think.
We're going to turn to Todd Robinson now.
Hello.
Hey, Todd.
On the call, Todd.
Hey, Kat.
Todd is, can I say something about you? Todd is a brilliant writer and a brilliant director whose films are all quite interesting. But why don't you tell them about your latest film that just it came out in the last 12 months?
Well, my latest film is something called The Last Full Measure, which is a true story of the effort made on behalf of a Medal of Honor candidate who was overlooked in 1966, who gave his life on behalf of people he did not know by the veterans he saved 30 years later. And it's really a beautiful, uplifting story of purpose greater than self.
And it is a very powerful movie, and you're got to be in tears when you finish this movie, because it's not what you expect, but it delivers a message that there is a world out there that has things like duty in it and respect and honor, and this movie reminds you of that and makes you long for that there to be more of that in our world. That's why I loved it so much. Anyway, Todd, you had a question.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Two things I was going to say. I was going to respond to what you were saying earlier about going back to that post office job or whatever that represents as the thing that you might want to depart from to some kind of work of passion. And I often tell my students who bring up this idea of always having a parachute or a fallback position. And I figure if you're going to jump out of the plane and you got a parachute, you're probably going to pull the ripcord. If you don't have the parachute, you're going to learn how to fly in a hurry, or you're going to hit the rocky cliffs below. So I think that making that personal commitment to yourself and to your dream is important, and not quitting never guarantees success, but quitting always ensures failure. So I've just I'm not the smartest guy you'll ever come across, but I was dumb enough to not have a parachute, and consequently I've had a long career. And I wanted to just talk for a second about what you led with, Ken, this idea about your own story and how that may or may not serve you. I started out as very committed to being an actor. I went to drama school and I came to Los Angeles, and that was, I didn't see any other future for myself. And I had an idea, and I shared it with someone, and she encouraged me to write it down. And I immediately went to my story, and my story was deeply embedded within me was that I'm ADD, I'm a terrible speller, I had horrible handwriting, and I was always told, in fact, I had to repeat the 5th grade, which was really quite, that was a real memory of shame for me, socially, ostracized for repeating a grade. And so when she brought up this idea that I should write something down, I immediately went to my story and rejected it. you know, and I listed all the reasons why I couldn't do it. And she said to me, well, you know, I can help you with that. She said, first of all, you know, I'll take you through it. I can spell check for you. I can proofread for you. She got me a friend to loan me a computer that had this amazing thing called a spell checker on it. I didn't have to handwrite. And that person turned out to be a guy named Steve Stark, who now runs television at MGM. The woman who helped me turned out to become my wife. And you know, I was really able to sit down and take these ideas and turn them into narrative, and to explore my own myself, my own story. And what I really came away from that with was that my story wasn't serving me, and that I could rewrite that story if I wanted to. And so I was going down this path, and I took a 90-degree right turn into the unknown, and it ended up becoming a passion for me, even though I didn't deliberately set out to do it. And I did get to participate in my dream, which was to be part of the community of filmmakers in Hollywood. And so my question for you is, how do you confront your own story, identify it, and then determine whether it's serving you? And if not, how do you, you know, coordinate that so that it can serve you?
That's a great question. I spent my whole life thinking about that question. And in my case in particular, because I'm kind of torn between two heroic Greek myths. One of them is the myth of Sisyphus. He's the guy that rolls the rock up the hill, and when it gets to the top, every single time it rolls back down, and he goes back down and rolls it back up again. And in an essay I read years ago when I was in college called The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, he says at the end of the essay, one must imagine that Sisyphus is happy. He's happy rolling that rock, and that's why it doesn't bum him out that he has to walk down the hill and roll it back up again. So part of me thinks that's what I've been doing in my life, but the other part of me loves the myth of Ulysses, of Odysseus, the one who wanders and wanders and wanders from one adventure to the other on his way home. And in a famous poem by an Alexandrian Greek poet, Cavafy, he at the very end of the poem, he says, one must imagine these Ithacas are his, meaning that the journey itself is Ithaca. That's where he's home. And I kind of think that, so I go back and forth and I say, here's the good things about the Sisyphus myth. Here's how I can apply it. Here's the things about Odysseus. And I end up coming back to Odysseus is the one that I like, because he's a storyteller, and he gets into situations and he gets out of them by telling stories. And it's always been the most useful one in my life. But you have to look around you and see, you know, what are the cartoons that make you laugh the hardest? Is it, you know, SpongeBob? Is it the Roadrunner? And start recognizing that behavior, you know, is the story always. And Sophocles once said, count no man happy until he is dead. The ending tells all. And what he means is we don't know how our own story is going to end unless we decide it and determine it. And that's why heroes who have given their lives for their country or for a cause get to shape their story. And you don't have to die at the end of the story, but you have to have the ending that makes you happy. And you can't predict your financial ending, or you can't predict your medical ending. But one thing you can predict is what you do along the way. So as again, I say, it starts with figuring out what you love and figure out how to do that along the way, because then you're going to die happy. I was once on a plane between Montreal and Toronto. I produced 8 movies in Montreal, and we did the post-production in Toronto. So once every 2 weeks, I had to fly from Montreal to Toronto because that's where the post was being done. And one time the plane was going to take off, even though they warned everyone that it was a blizzard. A blizzard was beginning, and that if you wanted to, you could reschedule your plane. And I saw that some others were going too, and I said, absolutely want to go. I want to be there for that mix that night in Toronto. And in the plane, as I was looking out over the snow piling up and plane being tossed around, I thought, you know what? If I die on this plane, I am dying in the middle of my own dream. I'm producing movies, doing what I wanted to do. I love it. And that's a happy death. So don't die in the middle of somebody else's dream. That's my advice. Figure out what your dream is. And as Todd said, go for it, because then you're going to have a happy death. You will have the ending you're looking for. The only one that won't be happy is that image of you on a rocking chair looking back all the things you regretted in your life. That will never be me. But yeah, I don't want it to be you either. You owe it to yourself. You only live once, for sure. And it's your story. You need to find it and make it happen.
Todd, thank you
And,
for your participation. Your movie was hugely inspiring to me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I
Thank you,
thought
Todd.
that was wonderful, wonderful movie. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
We'll turn to Donald Rock. Donald? He's on that call. You're unmuted, Donald?
Donald, you have to unmute. Yep, there you go.
Can you hear me?
You can hear you, Donald.
Hello? Oh, thank you, Mr. Mandy and Dr. Atchity for hosting this event today. I really appreciate your service.
Thank you.
Is there a modern or classic book or movie that comes to your mind that you think is relevant to viewers to look at during this pandemic?
The Last Full Measure. There's no question. It's called The Last Full Measure. It's a wonderful story. And there's some great actors in it, I might add, including Peter Fonda. I think that was his last performance, right? Yes, that's where we would, I'll talk to you later about this, Donald, but this is, I suggest it, 100%.
Okay.
Thanks
Yeah,
for your
it's a great movie.
Awesome.
And you know, you get inspired by the stories that you love. And if you sat there and made a list of your favorite 10 movies, you would be on your way to figuring out your own story, because the ones that you list are ones that you relate to. Like one of my, I love road movies. So I can sit there and make lists of road movies all over the place. And what does that tell me? What tells me that I'm right to choose the Odysseus myth over the Sisyphus myth? That I like people going places, discovering new things, learning from it, and then reporting them, basically. And so if I hadn't been doing what I'm doing, I might have been a newscaster or a journalist. I actually started out that way at Georgetown in Washington, but then decided that it would bring out all the worst in me if I went in that direction, especially in Washington, D.C. But you got to be honest with yourself. Find out, what do you like to eat? Do you like to cook? Some people, I just read a book about a man who opened a taco truck and ended up becoming enormously popular because everybody loved his tacos, but also his advice. And he couldn't be happier. And there was a movie that I'll never remember the name of now, but it was about a guy who opened a food truck, changed his life, and suddenly he went from I think he was running a restaurant before that was not making him happy, but opening the food truck did make him happy. So it's a great experiment, but when you think about the fact that it's your life and it's probably the only one you have, depending on your belief system, et cetera. But I always go like, let's live in the present. And as far as I know, this is the only one I've got. I need to be doing what makes me happy. That's where you should be too. There's no reason why you can't be that way too. And the reason I talk about safety nets is that some people just have to have the knowledge that they're not going to, that they will make it one way or the other. They won't starve to death, for example. Although in our country, there are people who have to worry about hunger. But if you have to have a safety net in your mind, that's fine. If you can be like Todd and the hell with the safety net idea, which is kind of what I did by giving up a tenured, job at a university to go into the least secure business in the world, then do it that way. There is no right or wrong at the end of the day. There is the only one is that you need to be doing what makes you happy, what makes you fulfilled. It's another word for happy, fulfilled. I don't even know what happiness really is, except to quote Aristotle again, it's steady progress toward a worthy goal, doing what you love to do and what you do best. What you love to do usually ends up becoming what you do best if you insist on doing it.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you, Donald. We'll turn to Doug Loud. Doug.
I find your comments very, very interesting, but I'd like to throw in a discussion of time. It has been my experience that many people, especially now where everyone has to shelter in place and nothing can get done, decide, especially if they come out of the military where many decisions are made for them, that they're going to go do something. And they start out to do it. And like the lady was saying earlier, well, we'll call you, don't call us. And the problem is they have set a schedule, totally unaware of the schedule of the people on the other side. I mean, I was hired at a major bank once and they said, we'll get our letter out to you tomorrow. But I had to wait 3 weeks for them to get around to it. That being said, I'd also point out in the time of sheltering in place that apparently Isaac Newton came up with his theory of gravity and invented calculus while sheltering in place at Cambridge University during the plague of the Black Death in the mid-1600s. So not all time sheltering in place is wasted. But can you just discuss people's vision of time, and maybe they should look at how other people are looking at the time so they don't get frustrated and give up on their dream because it doesn't happen as fast as they think it should?
I appreciate that question. I wish I could have written it myself, that question, because it's right up my alley. My first book was about time, and long ago I heard a statement that an Italian statement, "C'è più tempo che vita." There's more time than life, and I always wondered, what the hell does that mean? And I realized that what it means is that we have all of this time surrounding us, and we're not using it. There's much more time available, so that you need to be using your time and your life as much as you can. Once upon a time, I had a course called Literature in Death, which showed the kind of mood I was in that year. And I invited a man named Norman Cousins to come to talk to my class about death, because he'd had a near experience, and he wrote a book called Anatomy of an Illness, about how he got through his experience using laughter as his medicine. It was an amazing story. Anyway, during the class, he quoted this statement, and it blew my mind because I'd never heard any other human being who'd ever seen this statement or said this statement. And I took him to my office after the class, and I showed him it was framed above my desk because he had to see it. This coincidence was so cool. And the statement was a footnote from a Spanish philosopher, and it said this: the only immoral thing is for a being not to live every second of its life with the utmost intensity. And it blew my mind that Norman knew that, and we bonded immediately for the rest of his life. And that's what I think that statement meant, the Italian statement, that there's more time than life. We just aren't using it right. We need, when I do time consulting, we start out with an inventory of your time. Like, how many hours a week do you do this and that? And then people add it up, and guess what? They come out with preposterous numbers in terms of how many hours there are in a week, because they're always more than the real number of hours or less. And you need to never, you say, they said they'd be back to me and I had to wait. No, you didn't have to wait. You could have been doing 10 other things while you were waiting. And by the way, when you do that, like my daughter last year was looking for a new job, and she said she was going to make an application to someplace. I said, make 5 applications. Don't make 1, make 5. She goes, well, what happens if I, get more than one person? I go, that's what you want. That's the kind of problem you want to have. So she, in fact, made 5 applications and got 4 responses and had to choose. So it puts you in a better space. But she could have just said, okay, they said they're interested. I made an application. Now I have to wait for them. Don't wait. Take massive action. That's what I say. And here's a huge opportunity during this seclusion that we're in, this solitude, which is one of the most powerful things that humans can experience. Don Quixote, one of the great novels of all time, was written while Cervantes was in prison. And there are many other examples of great things that were done in forced seclusion. So I would say re-examine your own attitude toward time. Never wait for anything. There's all kinds of different times related to attention span. Some people have a huge attention span for cooking. I do, for example. I love to cook. Some people have a zero attention span for cooking. My father-in-law, for example, he can't stand it. Yeah, a lot of people don't do it. So, but what do you have an attention span for? Is it cutting lawns? Is it climbing trees? Is it scaling mountains? Whatever that is the thing you want to drift toward. And in the downtime, that while you're supposedly waiting, which again, I can't tolerate the idea, do use that time to research more about your likes, your dislikes. And, you know, with Google, it's like, we are not secluded. We can, every single thing you ever thought, you can find out the truth about by Google, although what you're getting is not always the truth. So you have to do it well, make sure you get a lot of different points of view. But nonetheless, we are not alone. We are able to reach out. I guarantee that after this crazy enforced seclusion, things will change in the world. A lot more of getting together will happen the way we're doing it today. I used to spend hours every week going to meetings, which takes an hour in one direction. I live in Los Angeles, an hour this way, an hour back, the hour or two in the meeting. Now I have the meeting and it takes 1 hour instead of the 4 hours. So a lot of people are going to say this is a better situation, not to mention what it does for the ecology. So I basically would say re-examine the whole concept of waiting. And the minute you plant a seed, go to another row and plant another seed, because someday all these seeds will be sprouting. And guess what? You'll be able to make choices that you can't make if you're just waiting for one seed to sprout.
Absolutely. Since you like stories, I'll just tell you one quick one. So I used to be a runner, and I would go out on these long runs in New York City, and I'd get down near a thing called the Shed, and there was a big warehouse there. And on the wall, it said, "Happiness is the journey, not the destination." And that always kept me going, because if I didn't run home, I didn't get to go home.
Yeah. See, that's what St. Catherine of Siena meant when she said, all the way to heaven is heaven. Don't wait for heaven. What you're doing to get there, where is the great part. You know, it's in The League of Her Own. Tom Hanks plays a baseball coach, and Madonna's moaning and groaning about how difficult it is to play baseball. And he says, the difficult part is the great part. If it were easy, everybody would be doing it. And that's why I say relish the journey, because that ends up at the end of the day being what you cared about the most, was the actual journey. If you're a writer, you care about writing the most. If you're a speaker, you care about speaking the most. If you're a chef, you care about cooking the most. You know, if you're a mountain climber, you're most alive when you're on the side of a mountain. And you need to find what that thing is for you, and not be limited and reined in by preconceptions that you got from your parents or from your family or from anybody who wants you to go and work for a certain place, because that's what we all do. We're all grocers, so go work for a grocery store. People are afraid of challenges, and they're afraid of daring, and they're afraid of security, of giving up their security. And when I was a professor, everybody said, I can't believe you're giving up security to go into the film business, which is obviously the living opposite. And I said, you know what? Security is an illusion. And freedom, which I've chosen, is an illusion too. I know that. But it's my illusion. So that's what I'm saying. When you're looking for your story, you're looking for your illusion. What is the thing that makes you happy, and it motivates you to go through difficulties and obstacles to get to where you want to go? What will make the journey work for you the best? You know, some people just like driving, so you know they end up being truck drivers, and they love their lives because they're endlessly driving, and they're listening to music or they're thinking or whatever they do, but they don't have to worry about a million things that other people have to worry about. Driving satisfies them. Those people are lucky. So the lucky people are the ones who do what they love. You can see them around you. They don't talk about it much because they know that it threatens other people, but they will talk about it if you really care and want to talk to them about it. They're the ones you should ask advice of. You know, we forgot to mention, don't ask advice of the wrong people.
We're going to turn to Richard Drago, who I mentioned at the beginning of the call that was so responsible for this call. I don't want to put you, Rich, do you have anything to add today? Certainly appreciate everything you've done.
No, very interesting discussion. I like the thing about the part about how do you describe your military experience being a Vietnam vet. I remember when I first came back, some of the younger kids would say, did you shoot anybody? You know, the questions were all over the place. I was lucky when I came back. I had an uncle who was the data center manager for George Buck at Two Penn Plaza. And he introduced me to the wonderful world of IT, and I spent 30 years in it. So sometimes you're right. Sometimes your first job is just a lucky break. I was kind of sure of what I was going to do, and then I turned around and did a 180 and never looked back. So great discussion today, guys. Love being a part of it.
Well, thank you for facilitating it. We really appreciate that.
And we're going to turn to Larry Newman. Larry, appreciate all your support. If you have a question today or something you'd like to say.
Hello, gentlemen. How are you? Everybody hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you perfectly.
Great. Listen, this is all kind of new to me, and but I appreciate the opportunity to, discover a new way to assist our veteran community in their transition or communication. I think plays an important role in that, and this whole concept of being able to, tell our story, I think is very, very important. There's a catharsis that takes place, of course, when we have that opportunity. So I'm interested and open-eared and looking forward to learning more about this.
Thanks so much, Larry. We're going to turn now to Scott Edmonds, who has questions from our audience. Scott?
Yeah, I just wanted to say first that the audience has been really participating and sending in good questions, and there's people who raised their hand and would like to ask some questions. So I'm gonna start calling on them. Charles Booton, if you're available to ask a question.
Yes. How do you all hear me?
Very well.
Perfectly.
Okay. Hey, great presentation, Ken. And by the way, Todd, saw your movie when it opened in January with a bunch of Air Force, retired Air Force PJs. And man, what a success. Bring your hanky is all I got to say. It was a wonderful, wonderful movie. So anyway, what I was just going to say, I retired back in 2006. And upon my retirement from the Air Force, worked pretty much down the hall from where I'd retired from as a contractor for the Air Force, something that I really wasn't planning to do. Worked out fine. It wasn't really anything that I was really all that interested in. And so I decided just to kind of retire, if you will. I found myself getting involved with some volunteer work and so forth, which was very satisfying, some with hospice and military officers association and things like that. And did a crazy thing like buy an airplane, so I'm messing with that. And then I got a part-time job, kind of like what you were talking about, Ken. If you like driving a truck, if you like to drive, you drive. So I got a part-time job where I drive, where I deliver RVs and travel trailers, which is a lot of fun. And it's can be challenging at times and so forth. A lot of crazy folks on the road, but it's something I really enjoy to do. But one of the main points that I want to bring is that, inherent in our military service, we have a lot of valuable skills that is just taken for granted when you get hired and when you look for a job on the outside. Being able to speak clearly, communications, being on time, looking presentable, being polite. I've heard of guys that and gals that have gotten out of the military, and right away, just like that one gentleman's talking about, you know, what do you want to do this summer? Well, I don't know. I just got out of the military. Boom, you're my manager of my theater. And I've heard of stories where, you know, all of a sudden the guy or gal is running the sales department at a car dealer just because A, they show up on time, B, they look presentable, they're polite, their reports add up, their sentences, their diction, their spelling works. And I try to impart on these young kids that are going to the military, the communications is a huge piece of the equation. You don't want to be, taking all this time writing these long emails, and, you got to be succinct. You got to be able to communicate and pass on your message as succinctly as possible. Your boss, nor do you have time to be getting into a lot of detail, and being accountable and being presentable. You'll be surprised how far along it gets you. I have a friend of mine that's a friend of a friend that's been involved in the banking industry for many years, and he told me when somebody comes to interview him, and right away they start asking, well, what about a parking space, and do I get to use the gym, and do I have how many days off? He doesn't, that person's gone. He wants to hear, like, how can I contribute to make the company better? What can I do to, bring my skills to the fore? If you don't blow your horn, nobody else will. And take advantages. I knew some guys in the Air Force that always won all these awards, these quarterly awards, these annual awards. And why was that? Well, you get jealous of the person. Well, he put himself in for them. He contacted his boss and said, hey, listen, these are the things that I've done during this period of time. Could you put me in for XYZ award? So my point is, take advantage of the opportunities you have. We come to the, we in the military, we learn a lot of valuable skills, a lot of which is just the golden rule, being accountable, being on time, and being able to communicate. And that, what I fail to see in a lot of folks in, you name it, politics and leadership, don't have those skills. That's a huge something that we can all take for granted, and it's a valuable portion of our contribution as we transition from the military. And that's about what I had to say. All I had to say on that.
I really appreciate you're saying that, because as somebody who hires folks and looks at the applications that come in, if we have an opening, we get something like 60 applications in the first 24 hours, and you can quickly go through them and see what people have to offer, partly just by the way they prepare their resume. That tells you a lot. But what I was talking about earlier is that the first thing you do is you sit down and assess your pluses and your minuses. All the things you just mentioned are in the plus column, and they instantly stand out, but you need to be aware of them. You need to realize that they are part of your story, that you did gain that kind of discipline, that kind of respect, and that it's extremely valuable. You can't just discount it as, oh, well, everybody did that. Well, guess what? In the civilian life, not everybody does that. Not everybody. I can't even believe people don't think that coming to work on time is that important. They show up 20 minutes late, an hour late. They always have some wonderful story about it. But guess what? We don't want to hear the story. We want the person who's there. And I have one person who's always saying, what else can I do to help? Like, always saying that. And that's the attitude you're describing, and it's part of your asset list. And sometimes it's hard to see your own assets, but go through a review and talk about it. My mother always taught us that, punctuality, she said, is the courtesy of kings. I never forgot that. And I am never late. I am always early, in fact, which can be crazy. But it's a lot better than being late, because I don't even understand the mentality of being late, of not being neat, of not caring about spelling, for example. You need to care about everything to make good presentation. And those are all part of your assets. If you have spell check on your computer and you don't use it, what does that tell, whoever you're trying to work with? If you're mowing a lawn and you don't bother trimming around the trees, what does that tell the person you're working for. More than that, though, what does it tell you? The kind of pride that you often get in the service is absolutely invaluable. The pride of doing it, doing it square, doing it right, and getting it done right is part of the asset of anyone who's gotten that training and discipline that almost everybody gets in the service one way or the other. So thank you for bringing that all up, because it's crucial.
I want to just tell one anecdote. This is David Mandy. Not about how wonderful I am, but about process. I'll take off on what Todd Robinson said. I was ADD, was of the undiagnosed generation, and for whatever reason didn't flower intellectually till after high school. Had to do heavy construction. But when I caught fire, I went to a small college and decided I wanted to be at NYU's English department. Of course, I didn't have the test scores for it. I had a 2-year record of straight A's at a small college, but that wasn't enough. Application process wouldn't have done it for me. What I do, I went to the English department, talked to the head of the department, and talked my way in. So I'm just saying, sometimes, all these applications, you got to try and, you can't be too much of a rule follower. Sometimes you got to break the rules and get in front of these people.
David, you're giving an example of why it's important to take charge of your story, because when you take charge of your story, you know how to break the rules. You know exactly how to do it. It's Robert Frost said, writing free verse is like playing tennis with the nets down. Well, you can't play, unless you really know how to play tennis, you can't play with the nets down. And that's what you're saying, is that you can break rules, but only if you have your story clear. Because people will fall for your story. They love stories. They're going to listen to that story and they're going to forget about the rules.
Great questions.
I just wanted to tell one more anecdote, which is when I was in graduate school, I got it, had to do a test in one of those little blue books that they gave you. And it was in a foreign language, and it was answering all these questions about the language. And it was based on a poem in that language that you had to answer questions about. And I just didn't feel like it that day. And plus I was stymied by half the questions. So I just spent the test translating that poem into English that matched the rhythm of the poem. And I ended up getting the highest grade in the class, but I was completely breaking the rule because I decided I just didn't care. I wanted to show how much I loved it without answering all the questions. And you can break the rules, but you have to have a clear vision of yourself to do it. And that's what we hope people can come to before they get out there and find what fulfills them in life. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's great. I have it's more of a comment, but I thought this was important from Karen in the audience. And it is, as a military spouse, it is a big change for the spouses as well. They are used to handling things when you are out on active duty, and to work a balance when they transition can be challenging besides just finding a job. Just wanted to put that out there as something you might want to comment on the spouses.
Well, that's a very interesting question that oddly enough, writers have to deal with too. Like, what does a writer's spouse do for the writer? And I think that if you decide to undertake the quest to say, find your right living, the thing that you need to do, you need to have your spouse firmly on board and supportive. And I venture to say that some breakups have been caused by somebody deciding to do something that the spouse considered to be crazy. But it's not as difficult as all that if you tell the spouse that all you're asking for is support. You're not asking for anything else. Like I always tell writers, do not ask your spouse to read your manuscript. I mean, that's like handing somebody a pipe bomb and then standing there waiting for it to explode, right? You just say, all I need is your support. Or if somebody does get involved, like, I just want you to tell me to keep going. I don't want you to be a judge, because putting the spouse in a judge position is going to be self-sabotaging to your quest and also to your relationship. So it's important to get your spouse on board. Like, okay, honey, I'm going to do whatever I have to do for the next 5 years to make sure we get the kids through the next level of school. But after that, I am going in the direction that I've dreamed of, and I hope you'll support me. And I think that it's individual, very personal, but it involves communication. As someone said a minute ago, communication is one of the skills you learned, and this is where you really have to use it. Honest communication. Don't avoid it. Don't polite it up. Just put it down and say, here it is. I'm not happy doing what I'm doing. I want to change, but I don't want to jeopardize anything, that affects us. And most spouses will say, go for it. I'm behind you. That's what you want to hear. And, it's everything is different. Every situation is different, but I think that's where it starts, communication.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I know Tracy Price Thompson, you wrote a question in, but would you like to ask it live? I'm going to unmute you.
Hey.
I'll just go ahead and read the question from Tracy. How can newly separated service people transfer their management and leadership skills to from the military to the civilian workforce?
Well, that's very much in keeping with the questions we're just talking about, and it's a very good question. I think that the real issue at the heart of that question is, what do you want to manage? If you were an accountant in the military, maybe you can get a job as an accountant in civilian life more easily because of that. But when it comes to management in general, which so many people in the service get to experience and get good at, go back to that question of what do you want to do before you ask about how do you move your management skills into civilian life. Because it could be that what you need to do is manage your own business, or it could be that there's a certain kind of thing. Let's say you're a sports nut and you were always in charge of the betting pool, in your core, and you couldn't think of anything better than managing a sports team or working with the management of a sports team. So you just have to ask always two questions. What can I fit into something that will make me happy, or shall I create something that will make me happy? And we can all think of examples of people, like one woman I just finished working with, writing a book with her. She decided she just wanted to work for herself and needed to go into business. She had no idea what business to go into, but she and her girlfriend decided to start baking cakes. And the only thing is, they realized by the end of the weekend where they made this decision is that neither one of them had ever baked a cake, but they were good at marketing. And they actually, within a week, had about 100 orders. So they ran down to the local Safeway and got cake pans. Turned out they got the wrong size cake pans and had to go back and get the right size ones. And they got a recipe from a couple of people, and they started baking cakes. And 10 years later, they have 8 shops, including at the airport of their city. And it's because they decided that they knew what their skills were, and they needed to find something that would make them happy. And what they decided during that weekend is, what? Everybody loves a cake. Even if you're on a strict diet, when somebody cuts a cake, very few people are going to turn down a piece of that cake, unless, of course, the people live in LA. But there's an example of transferring skills. She was actually working in a bank and was working in being a teller in accounting and accounts management, and decided that she could take those skills and go into something that she loved, which is the idea of making people happy by giving them a cake. Just shows you that the idea of what you love is maybe broader than some of it may have sounded like in the last hour, but what made her happy was making people happy, and she found a way to apply her business skills to something that ended up being successful way beyond any dream she had. All she wanted to do was find something that made her happy every day, as opposed to having to go to a place that didn't make her happy every day. So it's a real serious self-analysis. Socrates said long ago, the unexamined life is not worth living. So you need to actually look at yourself, your life, your activities, your behavior, your assets, and your weaknesses, and decide on your own, in your heart, you will know what the right thing to do is if you work on it enough and get some advice along the way.
Good advice. So I have another veteran here, DJ. DJ, do you have a question?
Yeah, how's it going? Can you hear me, Ken?
Yeah, perfectly.
Great, great. I just want to piggyback off of some things that you had said and that Charlie had said, just about success after the military. I spent 7 great years in the Air Force as security forces, and then I got to follow 2 years up after that with, the Army. One of the great things about it is I have a lot of, soldiers and airmen that reach out to me still to this day, asking for help. And I love how you touched base and you said, don't ask for help, but ask for advice. And that's what I try to give them all, because what's helped me succeed after my, because it was hard times for me. I was security forces, my whole background, college, everything has been law enforcement. And then I got into the construction fields. Well, what helped me be successful and to maintain my success was the 3 key factors that, I learned in the Air Force, which was integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. Well, integrity first, you take that upon yourself. You take pride in your work. You prepare yourself for the task at hand, whether it be an interview, for an upcoming job. You prepare yourself just as if you're to go before a board in the military. And then, as for, excellence in all we do, anytime you go to the job, you've touched base on that, and a lot of people have, is go into the job, being confident but not overconfident, learn to take advice, and then, execute anything, to your fullest potential and all of that. And then, my question would be, to those out there, like we have what's called the Brave Badge Initiative. It's for airmen out there that are in security forces that are still serving or are prior service. How can we reach out to those and, get that across to them that, don't ask for help, but ask for advice? How do we, get that through to them, as to, a lot of people always say, if you need help, ask for it. Well, I like your, saying of don't ask for help, ask for advice, because it seems more positive and it seems more influential than asking for, help.
I could talk for an hour about what you just said. It's such an incredible mouthful of truth that we should all spend a little time on. The first thing that struck me was, aside from the integrity first, which is fantastic, is that the word service before self. I mean, we're living in a society that has nearly forgotten the concept of service. Self-interest has dominated in the last years to the point where service is almost a forgotten art. My wife happens to be Japanese, and when we go to Japan, service is everything. I mean, people are so attentive to the needs of their clients, their consumers, and just fellow citizens. They believe in service, and you guys came from the service. You were lucky to be part of an organization in which the very concept of service was institutionalized, and then you come back into an environment in which service is almost forgotten. So if you continue to believe that service before self, that is a massive asset to put on your side of the your plus column. And excellence is the best. I mean, to me, that's the highest thing I can say about anything, is that it's excellent, because we were taught by Jesuits long ago to strive for excellence. They also told us, by the way, that nobody will ever reach perfection. But if it's not your goal, then you'll never get near it. Whereas if it's your goal, then you might just get near it once in a while. And that's the only worthwhile striving, is to strive to be excellent, to try to be perfect. knowing full well that you won't reach it, but it's a noble quest. And it's integrity is doing what you love. It's doing what is real, what is meaningful to you. So it's not integrity. It may be convenience. It may be whatever, but it's not integrity to be living a job that you really doesn't please you, doesn't satisfy you, in which you can't go home at night thinking you've had a good day. So that's why integrity applies to this concept of finding your own work. And I am sorry, but I have forgotten the actual question now. Can you repeat the question?
The question was just how, because like I said, I've used all those assets that were instilled in me, and the discipline that was instilled in me, to reach out to others, where I simply just tell them, it's more, I give them advice, and that's what I'm going to reach out to multiple, leaders out there that are still serving, and, use this method with them as to, hey, ask your soldiers, ask your troops, ask your airmen, tell them to ask for advice rather than ask for, if you need help, ask for help, because a lot of, go through a lot, being deployed, a few times overseas, seeing things, in my career field, seeing things that, people have seen. Ask for advice on how to get, bless you, ask for advice as to, how to overcome, those, thoughts in your head and all of that. How can leaders reach out to their airmen and their soldiers and their troops and say, don't come to me for help, come to me for advice?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for reformulating that question, because the other thing about that question is that when you ask for help, you're basically empowering yourself and focusing on yourself. And you're saying, I need you to do something for me. When you ask for advice, you're empowering the person you're talking to. And that always feels good to that person. And it brings out the best in them. And all I can say is you should use every method at your disposal to communicate that to whoever you're communicating it to. You can do it in email, you can do it in Instagram and tweets, etc. And you can just write a letter to people that point this out to them, and formalize, do it on the internet, just every way you can, but especially do it when people are asking you for help. Like, it's very difficult for me, a responsible kid growing up Catholic, to say, I can't help you when somebody comes looking for help. But I've learned long ago that that's not the best way to help somebody, is by helping them. It's to say, listen, what I can do for you is I can give you some advice. I will sit with you and you tell me what's going on, and I will give you some advice. And if people really think you're going to sit there and listen to them, then they love getting advice. Help is a temporary thing. Advice can last forever. It's the whole thing about teaching people to fish instead of handing them a fish. So I'd say communicate it every way you can. Think outside the box about doing it. Maybe reward people for not asking for help, but asking for advice. It all depends on your situation, but you'll figure out a way. Now that you see clearly how useful it is, you'll figure out a way to get it out there.
Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate the input on that, and the, extra advice that I can give to, those, a bunch of my brothers that are still serving. I can go to them with that, and, have them reach out and, explain that to their troops and their soldiers and all the airmen out there.
Well, good luck with that. I think that's it's a noble enterprise to even do that, because people just don't get enough advice from people who care. We're so inundated with commercial messages all the time that, our first reaction is, oh my God, not another, you have to really sincerely care about what you're doing. And somebody once said that, a famous writer once said, the secret to speaking is having something to say. And if you have something to say, you'll get it across. It's people who say things that aren't their own that you have difficulty talking about it. And that's why you'll find a way to do this in a way that only you can do.
Yeah, and that's what I'll absolutely do my best. Like I said, the main key that I try when people do, like when I do have airmen reach out for help, is I try to give them advice. You know, take what you learned in the military and apply that to the civilian world. It's going to be different. It is a hard struggle, but if you keep that positive mentality and that, integrity first and excellence in all we do, and of course service before self, you're going to succeed. I mean, you've touched on numerous points on how to succeed, taking stepping stones. It's, if you fail, don't be afraid to get back up and try to strive for something different. I mean, like I said, I had a lot of I have a lot of background in law enforcement, and here I am doing construction now, and I run a great successful business in rental properties. But that's the key thing that I've empowered and done for myself, was to always put excellence in all I do, strive to be 100%, and I'm not afraid to ask for advice, and that's what I want, most of those troops out there and everybody to, out there that's, if we have veterans out there, I've seen quite a few veterans come online, reach out to your, ex-peers and your your former leaders and, the ones that are leading now to, take this as, advice, so to say, and tell them to, relay this message on to their, them, and have them ask for advice rather than ask for help. But I appreciate everything, Ken. I've been on here quite a bit, so I'll let you move on to the next one.
Thank you so much for the observations and for those three great principles. I mean, another word for excellence is impeccability. It's a word that's rarely used these days, but in a book called The Education of Don Juan, Carlos Castaneda asked this question. A warrior is marching, walking through the valley, surrounded by cliffs from which boulders are falling. And he sees that his shoelaces come untied. And he knows that if he stoops down to tie his shoelace, at that very second, a boulder might come out of the mountains and strike him because he stooped down to tie it. He also knows that if he doesn't stoop down to tie it, he might be hit by a boulder because he didn't stop to do it. So what does he do? This is kind of a moral, a metaphor for life itself. And the answer is, a warrior, when he sees something that needs to be done, he does it. So yeah, he ties his shoelace, and he can't control everything. He can't control the boulders. He can't control, but he can be excellent. He can be impeccable. That's impeccable behavior. And when I think about military, my favorite scenes from movies, it's always the ship shape concept of doing it correctly, not because it matters on the cosmic scale that things are done correctly, but because it matters on the personal scale that there is a concept of correctness and nothing less will be accepted. I love that thing about military service is it teaches people the importance of excellence. And in a world where there's so many gray areas that it's easy to lose sight of that. And we all need we need more things like respect, duty, responsibility, excellence, service in our civilian society. So when you come back from the service, bring all those qualities back and try to put them into what you do, as obviously you've been doing. And we appreciate that a lot and need more of it.
Yeah, thank you, DJ. David, that's all the questions we have from the field.
Terrific. We're gonna, I told Nicole I'd come back, so I just want to ask Nicole, because she's been so helpful to me in understanding this issue. Nicole, do you have a final question or comment?
Hi, David. It's Nicole. I just want to say this is an amazing discussion, and I hope that this may be offered again, because I really didn't know what to expect going into this, but I found it, even being out 5 years and thinking, maybe I had found my purpose and reflecting on my career, I thought I made a lot of notes, and it really got me thinking. And so I'd love to have more veterans be a part of this, and I hope that you guys will follow up with some other opportunities.
Thank you, Nicole. It's so helpful. Ken, I'm going to turn back to you for you had to respond to Nicole, and then for closing remarks.
Oh, okay, you want me to respond to Nicole? Yeah, we would like to find ways. David and I are working to find ways of trying to be helpful by these observations that are not, they're not psychiatric, they're not medical. They're just based on kind of observations of life and the desire to help. It's one of the greatest satisfactions when you can actually help someone. Over the years, the older I get, the more the happier I get by seeing that, you did something 10 years ago that has changed my life, and I didn't even realize that I was just doing what I do. But at the end of the day, helping each other is what makes us different from other species, although at some points other species do a better job of it than we do. So to be the most human and the best of humanity, we need to continue that in every way. So the idea of paying it forward, you're grateful for what you got that was positive out of the service. Now pay it forward by bringing those principles to the help of others making the transition. And it's already happening. I know that if you're running a construction company and somebody comes from the service and is looking for a job and wants to know how to fit in, where to fit in, that you will take the time to advise them. I'm not saying you have to help them, but advising them is a unique thing that you can do. And that's all we're trying to do is to advise people and to, again, it's difficult to do it in general because it's the question and answer parts that make us able to relate to things personally. We appreciate your questions and for your coming today, and just basically say to yourself, anybody who's trying to find their right livelihood should be willing to have many false starts, to fail over and over again, because the only way that you will ever truly fail is not to continue trying. And as the guru said to the lady who said, how many times can I pick myself up? How many times can you fall? If you have enough energy to fall, believe me, something will pick you up. You'll either pick yourself up or you'll get a break. And wish everybody the best of luck, and wish we could continue the dialogue. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for our panelists for the great questions, and I appreciate that a lot. Thank you, David.
Thank you. I want to just thank everyone for all your participation. Without it, we couldn't have had the interaction we had, and I really feel like we've answered, Ken's helped answer a lot of questions. So I want to wish everyone a pleasant evening, and again, thank you for your participation.
Thank you. Stay safe.